Welcome to Perspectives with Asima Silva, and today we have a really interesting topic. And I'm going to introduce our guest, but before I do, I just wanted to introduce you to the knowledge of the topic that I have. I have very, very little knowledge on this particular topic. It's a topic that I've heard in school, and even though I'm of Indian ethnicity, I really don't know much about this kind of situation. What I'm going to talk about is the untouchables in the Hindu caste system. You might have heard about it, you might have studied it in school like I have, but it's a lot more to it than I know. And I have a great guest today called his name is Dr. Suraj Yeng, and he's a Harvard scholar who is from the Dalit class known as the Untouchables in India. And if you've learned anything from school, the Untouchables were the lowest of the caste. Dr. Suraj is the author of the best-selling book, Caste Matters, published by the Penguin Random House, and the editor of The Radical in Ahmedkar, published by Alan Lane. So the fact that I'm having trouble pronouncing these names can tell you how much Indian history that I am aware of. Dr. Suraj is a well-known public intellectual with regular appearances on TV and print media, and his Caste Matters book was voted as the best book of the decade by the Hindu newspaper. And his work in the Philadelphia Colonel West Explorer, Black and Dalit Solidarity. So he is a very accomplished writer, very, very knowledgeable on this particular topic. And with what's going on in India right now, if you have been watching the news, there is a lot of tension between Hindus and Muslims and the Hindu caste system, and how essentially most citizens are being treated in India. India is on the genocide watch list, and this is a big concern for people who work in organizations and volunteer for organizations. And a full disclosure, I do volunteer for Justice for All, so I have been involved in some of these talks with our leaders in this country, advocating for the rights of all citizens in India, because it is a democratic country, and my ethnicity is Indian, and of course my family does come from India, and from what I know, that they loved it. All religions were accepted during their time. Unfortunately, times are changing. So thank you, Dr. Suraj, for coming on our show. And boy, are you accomplished. But could you just give us an overview of the caste system? When I say overview, I'd really like to know not only how is it related to religion, how is it related to economic status, and how does it really then present itself in every day-to-day life of an Indian, depending upon which caste they're in.
Thank you so much for having me, Asima. And I'm also very happy to meet a fellow Hyderabadi, because Miles, we were part of the Hyderabad kingdom ruled by the Nawabs. The caste system in India is, in its own apparent sense, looks very simplified. Looks like 5 divisions of society, and then there are Brahmins, then there are the people who are considered as the kings, known as Kshatriyas. Then there were third category, the Banyas or Vaishya, who had money-related business work. Then there were the lower castes who were doing actual physical manual labor. And then there was a fifth category that was not considered part of a human ecology.
So not human at all?
Not human at all.
So what was they classified as? When you say not human, I'm a little baffled.
That's right.
What does that mean? Is it slave status? Because even slaves were semi-human.
Exactly. So they were outcasts. They were out of the caste system to be considered human at all. And that's why they were known and termed as untouchable, unseeable. So their very presence was banished from a quotidian or regular life. In villages, they were ostracized and kept at the fringe of the villages. So if you have to go and fetch water was in village. So you have to walk about 2 to 3 kilometers or more to fetch water. And then usually getting the water had certain protocols to be followed. One of the protocol was that you have to remove your footwear, because you can't have footwear in your feet that kind of levels your status.
So when you say remove your shoes, you're saying shoes identified someone as having status?
Yeah.
And so they had to remove their shoes.
Exactly.
To identify that they didn't have status.
Yes.
Okay.
It's basically bare minimum of your lifestyle. Then
When you say remove your shoes, is that in public places or
Yeah,
at
it's
all
a-
times they couldn't wear shoes?
no, this is specifically when you're going through a caste Hindu villages who were dominant caste people,
Okay.
and they didn't want it to have as an affront of a lower untouchable wearing shoes in front of them. That's totally disrespectful to my
them.
status and ego. Then also you had to remove your headscarf or whatever the regional headgear they had to wear, just as a mark of reverence, because this is like paying respects to the upper lords. Because we have to understand these untouchables were the serfs. They were serving as landless laborers into the farms of these people owned by this dominant caste people. So they had to follow certain protocols. And then they were unseeable, meaning if you perform a certain religious duty, the untouchables were banished because even the sight of them was impure for your own conscience.
So how did anybody communicate with them?
It was no communication at all.
So, okay, I'm going to back up for a second. I mean, you're sitting in front of me and you look like a very typical Indian.
Yeah.
From your looks, how do I tell that if you're an untouchable? Other than you actually following the rules and following these kind of rules of not wearing shoes and not wearing a headgear, what if you refuse to? How would anybody know?
This is a very good question, and I think this physical markers is very important to kind of identify, especially in a racialized context. We kind of tend to, identify with this or that. In the Indian caste system, it's a very localized oppression. So because this is how your last name is a marker of your identity. My last name represents the untouchable status. So according to the last names, the last names are given. The totemic relation in the society was what your last name connoted. And that's why the last names became default markers of caste system. So the last names are basically caste names. And if a person from the same locality comes who is upper caste, it has been ingrained in our minds so much that even if I'm in America, if a person from dominant caste from my region comes, I'm almost used to submit myself to the authority of the person. This is not because
Because it works both ways.
Yeah, because it is conditioned in so way that I get intimidated.
Okay.
Because the intimidation is layered through the presence of my relation with other person. And I might reject in my own intelligent way and the way I look at it, but that is not always the case with everybody else, because that's how it is trained. It's very much peculiar to how any form of localized oppression. It's for example, you exploit somebody, then you abuse the person.
Yeah.
The victim will always remember the abuser.
Yes.
Whatever circumstances you might have, the trauma kind of kicks in. Right. Similarly, for the untouchable, this kind of trauma continues. Wherever they go, they kind of have this. But also, they strive for a better life. And in their striving for a better life, they refute the authority of a person who is upper caste,
Right.
because everybody is equal.
Essentially, you have to.
Absolutely.
Or else you can't
But,
progress.
but then when we refuse, we receive punishments. To go back to your question, what happens? We receive punishments. We get ostracized or get sanctioned out of the village. And many times, it's a physical violence. An entire village attacks these few houses, huts of Dalits, as we call them. And that's why we see mass exodus of Dalits leaving villages and migrating to urban areas. And then what do? You look in every big city, every signals, the lights, what we call here, there are beggars.
Yes.
Or you go to any dargah or any temple,
Right.
any mosque, outside you see these people who are in power. Who are these people? What is their demographic status? These are the people who have escaped the persecution of villages, and then they become what I call the urban refugees in their own land. And then we see the whole urban economy kind of exploiting them for their status.
I mean, it's funny you mention that because I'm American, and my visit or memories of India is when I went as a teenager.
That's right.
And I'm talking like older teenager, and seeing all those beggars in the streets. Now, growing in America, I have to say we don't see this. We don't see this form of living, this desperate form of living. To the point where I truly believe that every American child needs to visit a third world country to see how what life really is like for many, many people.
Mm-hmm.
Because We're blessed in this country because no matter what homelessness or what suffering you're going through, there are opportunities or ways to try to get yourself out of it. And I don't think we realize how the rest of the world does look. And I have to be honest, when I did go to Hyderabad, and many of my viewers may not know this, my ethnicity is Hyderabadi, which is a particular city in India, very well known for their culture and their language and their food, and they pride themselves in much of their history. But it was amazing to see the poverty, the amount of poverty in the streets. And it's also amazing to see how many people ignore it. That I couldn't get over. People walk by.
That's right.
As if these people are invisible. We're not talking about seeing homeless signs on the streets at a stoplight and you just drive by. We're talking these people sometimes try to hold on to your hand or hold on to your feet begging for food or begging for money, and it doesn't affect them. Now, you're saying, I didn't know at that time, you're saying most of those people are untouchables?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why, the apathy is coming out of that. If you see a non-Dalit beggar, for example, that receives a reverence or that receives a charity of public good. But the untouchable begging is almost a default of India's culture. So if you are an untouchable, you deserve to live the condemned life of the lowest, the impure life that you have. And that's why we are so used to you begging on the streets.
How is this involved in religion, though? Where does this stem from? Does it stem from economic kind of structure that happened many years ago, or does it stem from religion or beliefs, or does it stem from a combination of both?
I think it has evolved through a complexities, as I've said. In its apparentness, it might sound simple, but it has a lot of cobwebs kind of interconnected. The economic factor plus the religious - cultural factor kind of plays a role in uplifting that, because the Hindu caste system validates the existence of untouchables. In fact, they produced what we call the fifth outcast, the avarna, the people who were out of the human system. And by doing that, their aim was to have a preserved labor that will be disposable whenever they want.
So it's more of a practicality reason for doing so?
Well, it is one way of putting that.
I don't know how else to put it because it's kind of baffling to me. But
no, indeed. I think one way of looking at it is to be sure not to have a working class base equal to your level, because the Brahmins in India's caste system, they don't work because they are not used to doing the job where you have to sweat.
So when you say work, labor or work?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So every economy developed from the work of the peasantry or the work that you did with soil. Brahmins are not allowed to work in the soil. They should only work in a very highbrow positions, be it the priests of a certain court or a temple, or be advisors, or be educationists, doing the job where you don't require to do actual manual labor.
Okay.
And I think this is where this asymmetry develops, where the people who are lower caste people and then the untouchables people, there is an investment for them to be untouchables, because if they're not untouchable, you are not a Brahmin.
Mm-hmm.
If
right.
you need, so for you to enjoy the status of a Brahmin, you have created a class of untouchables, so you can derive the pleasure of superiority by making someone else inferior. And this is how atrocious the system has been. And there is an entire investment of a religious discipline to regulate that this caste system exists.
Okay.
And I think that's why we see the untouchables having so many punishments if they void, if they don't obey the caste rules. And violence is just one of the gory violence that we see inflicted upon them.
So how many untouchables are in India? What's the percentage of the population that we're talking about?
So untouchables exist in all the religions, 320 million.
320 million people.
Who are untouchables in Indian society.
And how are they surviving? Because you're telling me if they go into certain stores or if they can't get educated. How are you don't need 320 million laborers. So how are they surviving?
I think they are not surviving. They are actually battling every day to just live a dignified, respectable life. when you look at the scale of disparities, the Dalits occupy the first position, be it housing, be it joblessness, be it entrepreneurship, be it ownership of resources like land. The untouchables are almost nowhere. How are they surviving is a question as to why are they still existing, or why do we need an untouchable class to still exist? Why is there, by Indian constitution, the untouchability is abolished, but the caste system is not. It is maintained intact.
Okay.
So it's
So according to the Constitution, it's abolished.
Absolutely.
But not through religion.
not through religion, because see, again, religion is a belief. It's a faith system. I mean, you can legislate
Right.
faith of anybody. And I think this, and what has happened is the wrong narratives have been penetrated into the minds of youngsters. And now they're coming to read the history. So when you talk about innovations, Dalit community has invented majority of art forms. What we call classic music in India is actually produced by Dalits in the fields, in their own little ghettos. But then it was, of course, almost in an analogy to the slave music here,
Right.
rock and roll and any various forms, blues and jazz, how it then becomes,
Right.
Similarly, we have that in India, but in India, that reckoning has not yet happened. It has slowly began. So the utter contempt and hatred for a Dalit is existing without the person knowing why am I hating the other person. And this is a kind of a very insensitive mind that unfortunately the parents and their grandparents give to their younger generation for them to then discriminate amongst other people. And you don't really have a reason to hate anybody,
Right.
But then you are the reasons are made up that people are taking opportunities from you. For example, the affirmative action policy that exists in India that only applies to a tiny minority of these Dalits, but yet it is presented as if they are taking away all the welfare provisions for the rest of the community.
Right.
And I think this is kind
Which
of
is a common story. And because as you're speaking, I'm thinking to myself, this is a combination of racism, it's a combination of slavery, it's a combination of the immigrants are taking over and taking our jobs. I mean, what you're saying, I feel like I've heard it before in this country in different forms.
Exactly.
As you were speaking though, my curiosity is, has anybody been able to break this and maybe give people an opportunity to see the other side of the story, that Dalits don't have to be treated this way?
I think, and this is why we don't need benign approach of an oppressor. It is the oppressed who needs to claim, and the oppressed are claiming their position, and whenever they claim, there is always a laugh down approach, or there is always a mockery if an untouchable or a Dalit is trying to perform or trying to outshow how he or she or they are existing in society. And I think to break that is to acknowledge the humanity of other. I'm not saying little less, little more, just the humanity of the other person. And I think it will only take when we have more, for example, candid conversations. Indian society is not used to having candid conversation. It is not courageous. It is a very cowardly society that believes in certain mythical past, which was never their own. And then when it comes to formulating a certain issue, they blame the colonizers, be it Muslims. And again, Muslim is not one. They were Turks, they were Afghanistani, they were Mughals, and there is a wave of 700, 800 years of this, if you will, the Islamic shades of various rule. Then they blame the British, and then they blame, notwithstanding the fact that this is, again, a very one-sided perspective of history, the history of the ruling class. The poor, the oppressed, don't have any say in this history, because history is made upon the oppression of the people.
Right.
And the oppressed never speak. They just become the mute, granted subjects. And I think to break that barrier, we need to have a very sincere conversation that we are having now, and to hear more stories about Dalits, to hear more about how their humanity is bearing witness to the global other form of tragedies and calamities that we have. In every fatalities that we have in India, there has been overwhelming reference to the one person's caste belonging. It's no accident that every 18 minutes, one Dalit in India undergoes a crime. I mean, somebody is inflicting some form of harm on a Dalit. And if you look at the rape statistics of a Dalit woman, every day 3 Dalit women are raped. Meaning by the time...
Because they're not human.
Because they are not human, but also, how dare they?
Right.
So if a woman challenges, and here's the thing, when I say challenges, I'm not saying like calling out and challenging even means defying certain codes of caste, the punishment she receives is a form of sexual assault. And this kind of repeated episodes of this are made to kind of teach lesson to other. And I'm talking about if there is any reference to, for example, as we are in America, of the slave era kind of oppression of women folks, that continues to happen in India as we speak now, because the rural focus of India, because 74% approximately India still lives in village. So we are basically talking about the 2/3 of the country, and their situation is very much akin, especially when it comes to the Dalits living in villages, to the plantation sites that we have in India. Although we might have law and everything, but again, law is just a paper tiger.
It's run by the upper class anyway.
Exactly.
So how is this new thing of Citizenship Act affecting the Dalits? I know it's affecting Muslims, it's affecting Christians, it's affecting anybody non-Hindu, but
That's
technically untouchables are in some shape or form recognized by the Hindu religion.
right.
So how are they affected by this Citizenship Act? And for our viewers, could you go over what the Citizenship Act is?
Okay. I think that's a good question, and I think I've been arguing about this, and I'm glad you asked this. Citizenship Act is basically we had a citizenship bill, and which has actually now become, it was a constitutional kind of provision that granted citizenship to people belonging to, and it still continues to, irrespective of the religion, and I think that was what we call post-independent social contract. But to just appease a certain fanatic Hindu mindset, the current right-wing Hindu government led by Modi, which has a very checkered history of dealing anti-Muslim violence in various massacres that under his leadership has happened. So it doesn't come as a surprise to some of us who have known this monstrosity for a few decades now. So CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, has actually altered the provisions for people from the neighboring South Asian region. So South Asia, as we know, is a region, and India is kind of a quote-unquote, due to its mass, is an epicenter. So people who are persecuted minorities in various states of Sri Lanka and any parts of others, Pakistan, can get the citizenship if they claim that they are oppressed for,
Right.
But barring Muslims. And why? Because Muslims are majority in Pakistan and Bangladesh, and it's made in a way to, and we all know it's not feasible to make such law, even it's in implementation. But again, the very concept of Muslim is complicated in the South Asian context. It's not Shia Sunni only.
Right.
It has a lot of layering of caste. And so how does this affect untouchables? And this is why we have to start removing the binaries of Hindu and Muslim.
Yes.
These binaries are very faulty, and they are very wrong. Why? It's because in the Hindu canon, there is nothing as Hindu. It's a forcible conglomeration of castes. A Brahmin is a Brahmin. A Shudra is a Shudra. Untouchable is untouchable. They are not Hindus. If they are Hindus, why are they not equal?
Okay.
If we belong to the same religion,
Right.
why can't I become a priest in an Indian temple?
Right now, the way the caste system works is you're born into it.
Exactly.
And so it's by birth, and
Yeah.
you can't get out of it.
Exactly.
And what you're saying is we should have the allotment. If you're part of the religion, you should be able to move within the caste
Why
system.
not? I mean, the very essence of religion is to exercise and experience the mobility of human spirits. One should not be confined to, I should not be limited into a certain box, and my spirits die into that. I should have my own meditative status to do whatever I want to. There is no freedom in Hinduism, and it's such a cesspool that it has confined people, and people will come to defend these atrocities, mind you. So in the Hindu-Muslim context, what happens in Muslims also, almost 85% Muslims in India are converts from the lower caste and untouchables. So we are talking about 85% lower caste Muslims also, right? I mean, Islam is not
Right.
South Asian religion.
Right.
It's a religion
Which
of
is a point that you bring up that a lot of our viewers may or may not be aware of is Islam also, like you said, 85% of Muslims in India converted
Yeah.
because Islam came as anybody can join in.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have to be of a certain caste or a certain economic status. So I think that's probably what attracted a lot of these lower castes to Islam, because they were able to get that reputation or that image or
Sure.
that reputation and respect that they were looking for. So knowing that, what you're saying is because they've converted, even though they were the untouchables, they're still treated as such.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding.
So this is the hypocrisy within the Muslims of India also. And matter of fact, I will say South Asia, because they have preserved, so in a contra identity to Hinduism, we are Muslims and we are a minority.
Yes.
That means the problem is with the majority. We won't have any problem amongst us. And that's totally hogwash. What that does is the elites of both religion, mind you, profit from the Hindu-Muslim divide. Why? Because the Hindu Muslims of both have custodians of the wealth from the historical time. See, Islam also ruled in India.
Yeah.
But doesn't mean the lower caste ruled. These were the people who were aristocrats and the rich monarchical class who ruled.
Right.
But the poor converted people, whose DNA is still relating to my DNA,
Right.
come from a specific stock. But by making Hindu-Muslim, Asima, this is where the problem arises, that the people who are lower caste from Hindus and lower caste from Muslims are pitted against each other.
Yeah.
Because the elites are not fighting against each other. They are not going to, the Bollywood is not, Khans and all the Kapoors are not fighting against each other.
Right.
They are profiting out of it. But the working class base, and that's why it's very dangerous to make this argument of Hindu-Muslim. We can't make the same argument, for example, in American context of Christian-Muslim. As we know that the famous divide of Malcolm X and
Right.
MLK, it was not only religious, but then they came together because their racial oppression was primary.
There was a common cause.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in Indian context, our Hindus as well as Muslim friends don't allow to have that internal interrogation, because the same practices, almost in different grades, continue to happen within the Islamic faith as well. So you might be converted, but the marriage still takes place within the same subcaste among Muslims. They go.
I am going to stop you on that because that is going to be this is such a important topic that we're going to continue this topic on our next show. I hope you keep joining us because this is billions, what is it, 2 billion or something people in India.
1.3.
1.3, yes. It is a lot of people that actually are subjugated to this kind of mentality and this kind of lifestyle. And societies are built up upon it. Many people do suffer from it. And I will share in the next show how it has affected me because of what you just said. I'm going to stop at that comment about how it's even in the Muslim culture, in the Indian Muslim culture, where there's some of this discrimination between these semi or invisible castes that exist. I hope you join us again, and thank you for joining and watching Perspectives with Asima.